Hello again. I am continuing on in First Kings. Actually, I finished First Kings, and there are so many things in the chapters after of what I had talked about already that could be said. But I would just want to highlight a few things about King Ahab. I find this king particularly interesting because he is a king that did evil in the sight of the Lord. Actually, the verse here, and I may have quoted it before, it says, when he became king, it says, and Ahab, son of Omri, did evil in the eyes of Jehovah above all who were before him. And it happened as if it were a light thing that he walked in the sins of Jeroboam. So we see this king Ahab, and he walks lightly. Even he does the evil things that Jeroboam did, he does so easily, and he easily walks in this sin, and it's doesn't mean anything to him whether it's right or wrong. He just does and doesn't care. Usually the kings who do evil in the sight of the Lord only get very little said about them. Like, you barely even know them. You know their name, you know how long they reigned, and it said the rest is written in another book, the book of Kings, that you can go read about. So basically there was very little said about evil kings. But Ahab is different. Ahab, for whatever reason, and I have a few speculations on it, but there is a lot said about him. There's many chapters who deal with this king, and it actually really reveals and exposes the wickedness of this king. It's why is it in here? And one of the very interesting things about Ahab that I find is that, so he does so many wicked things. And he's enticed, as a verse later it says, he was enticed by Jezebel, to do all these wicked things as well. Like, she really helped him along in being this wicked king, and he just kind of followed her lead, and just she said something, she did something, and he didn't really question her. Like in for instance in the story where he takes the vineyard from a man that he wants this vineyard from, and she goes and she has the owner murdered and gives it over to Ahab, and he doesn't ask or say, like, what happened to him. No, he's just happily going in his vineyard, and there's story after story, and the incredible story of God showing up in the challenge where the prophets of Baal and the prophet, he's the one prophet of God, and they make the two altars, and God shows up, and does not show up for the prophets of Baal, and they all get executed. There's that story. There's the story where there's no rain. There's a story where, well, you can read about it yourself, starting in 1 Kings 17. It's just story after story, which show Ahab's wickedness and how he walked not in the way of the Lord. Near the end of his life, this is what I find very interesting. Even though this king was so wicked, somehow he seemed to know that the word of the Lord was true. And also he seemed to know that God was God, but he just blatantly refused to follow and serve him. After this account, what I just told you about the vineyard, in verse 20 of chapter 21 of 1 Kings, Ahab says to Elijah, "Have you found me, O my enemy?" And he said, "I have found you, because you have sold yourself to do that which is evil in the eyes of Jehovah." He sold himself to do that which was evil in the eyes of Jehovah. to be known for this would be extremely, I mean, that's not what anyone wants to be known for, to be that he sold himself to do evil. And so God gives this prophecy against him because it says in verse 22, because of the provocation with which you have provoked me to anger and have caused Israel to sin. And so there's this prophecy against him because of it, the evil he did. And this verse is really sad. It says, surely, verse 25, none have been like Ahab, who sold himself to do that which was evil in the eyes of Jehovah, whom his wife Jezebel incited. After God speaks through Elijah and tells, if you read this whole section, and says of all these things that will happen to him, even though Ahab was such a wicked king and God warned him again and again and again, we see God's mercy to Ahab, because in verse 27 it says, and it happened when Ahab heard these words, he tore his garments and he put on sackcloth on his flesh and fasted and lay in sackcloth and went softly. And the word of the Lord came to Elijah the Tishbite, saying, have you seen that Ahab has been humbled before me? Because he was humbled before me, I will not bring the evil in his days. I will bring evil on his house in the days of his son. And wow, like Ahab humbles himself, even though if you read through all the things that he did, God is still showing mercy to this wicked man. And it comes to say that sometimes we can say, oh, I've done just too much. I've done too much. How could God ever forgive me for this? How could he ever blot this out of his memory? But the truth, the matter of the fact is that God is always, we are born an enemy to God. And Ahab had a chance, just like as much as, and maybe even more so than many of us, to turn from his sin. God again and again and again tries to speak into this man's life and to show himself as God and the only God. And yet this man refused. And yet even after all this was coming near to the end of his life, God again shows him incredible mercy for a heart that has been humbled. And I think that's the key. When we humble ourselves, when we come before God and we are truly sorrowful for the way we've acted, he will come and he will forgive. That is just who he is. And I'm so thankful he's that way, because we are all falling constantly, all the time, into sin, and we need to be forgiven. But it's so encouraging that God does this to a man whose life, and I think this comes into why Ahab has so much written about him. It really shows God and who God is, and really amplifies how God's mercy. And it really shows that the wickedness of these kings was super wicked. And yet God was willing to show up and was willing to make himself known and to give these men a chance again and again to turn. And sadly, Ahab does not. Just before Ahab dies, there's two kings who get together. One's name is Jehoshaphat and King Ahab. And so they want to go attack Syria together. And it's an interesting story, because Jehoshaphat says, please inquire at the word of Jehovah today, whether they should attack or not. And so Ahab, he gets a bunch of prophets. He gathers 400 men. And they prophesy and say, go attack, you'll be successful and all this. And it's kind of funny. Jehoshaphat said, is there not here a prophet of Jehovah besides, that we might inquire of him? Ahab brought 400 prophets to prophesy, and they were all saying, go attack, do this and that. But Jehoshaphat kind of like it's kind of a slap in the face. I don't trust these guys. It's not a prophet of the Lord, because actually Jehoshaphat was one of the kings who feared the Lord and did right in the sight of the Lord. This is what the king says. And the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, yet one man to seek Jehovah by him, but I hate him, for he does not prophesy good concerning me, but evil. Milcah the son of Imlah. And Jehoshaphat said, let the king not say so. There's one man that speaks the word of the Lord, but he always has evil things to say against me. Of course, if you're going to live a life opposed to God, and if God has revealed himself, this is even after the story where God shows him grace and says, it will not happen in your lifetime, the things I prophesied about. This happens after. And he says, I hate him. He hates the messenger, but actually he hates God, because God is the one sending him these messages, and they just do not line up to what he wants to do. And that is our sin nature working at its best, because when we don't have the gospel of change and transformation, where Jesus comes in and gives us a new clean heart, we will want to do the things that are counter God. We will want to do everything that upsets God. And here we see that. We hate the things of light because we love the darkness, it says in the New Testament. But when we are transformed by Jesus Christ, all of a sudden that changes. But Ahab had not been transformed. He hates God. And even what he says to Elijah, the chapter earlier, oh, my enemy, you have found me. He's not just saying this to, he's saying it to Elijah, but actually he's saying this to God, because God is the one who sends these prophets. And so he considers God his enemy. He hates him because he does not do what his sinful nature likes to do. And so, what a lesson here to learn from this king, that when we live our lives opposed to God, it does not end good. He dies, and I find this such a sad thing. It kind of ends with Ahab dying. He got shot by an arrow, and he dies. And this man never changed. This man died in his sin, and he died an enemy of God. And what a dreadful thing to fall into the hands of a living God when we die as his enemy. It's already a scary thing standing before God as a Christian, because of who he is and who we are. We're such sinful beings. Yes, we are redeemed and made clean by him, but still the fear of the Lord, this almighty being, to stand before him as a believer is already such a humbling thought. And how much more dying as somebody who hates God and who's an enemy of God. And so, we need to make sure that we are right with God, because we do not want to die in this position that Ahab did, as hating God and as an enemy of God. And so, I find this story, I think, is in here to teach us, to also show how these kings actually lived, to kind of lay one of these kings open and kind of the evil, wicked things he did, and then also to really amplify who God is, even amidst this sin, and how patient God is, and how long-suffering he is, to an enemy. How much more will God, be with us as his children, and will give us our needs that we need, and protect us and keep us safe. Anyways, I love you guys, and this was just, there would have been way more to be said in these stories. I just haven't had time, but love you all. Bye.